Welcome back to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. My name is Andrew Erickson, and today we're going to be breaking down my top 10 biggest busts for the upcoming fantasy football season. Landmine players that could potentially torpedo your season in a hurry. But first, if you want a chance to win a signed Javonte Williams Denver Broncos jersey, courtesy of our friends at Pristine Auction, you need to subscribe to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel right now, comment below on this video, and that's it. We'll be announcing a winner right here on the channel. So make sure to turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when new episodes are up and to claim your prize. Now, back to those players poised to bust in 2022. Starting with number 10, Mike Gesicki, Miami Dolphins. Gesicki is playing in a brand new role in the Dolphins offense this year under new head coach that will have him block and line up in line more than ever. His 94% slot snap rate from last season won't repeat, and I'm afraid he won't be able to take advantage of yards after the catch in this offensive system after ranking 41st among 42 qualifying tight ends in yards after the catch per reception last season. He's already been splitting snaps in the preseason with number 2 tight end Durham Smythe while working on the second team offense as he learns his new position. With 2 top-tier wide receivers to compete with for targets in a run-heavy offense, Gesicki is a must-avoid tight end that typically gets drafted in the middle range at the position. Number 9, Deandre Hopkins, Arizona Cardinals. Hopkins will be suspended 6 games for violating the NFL's drug policy and needs to be far off your draft radar. He won't be available until week 7. The big body wideout also wasn't the same dominant target hog in 2021 as he has been so many years prior. He battled through injuries and proceeded to just have 1 game with double-digit targets and 2 games with 80-plus receiving yards. He saw double-digit targets 8 times and went over 80 receiving yards 7 times in 2020. It's hard to imagine drafting Hopkins with a 6-game suspension baked in. It's not worth a roster management headache when the start of the season is so critical for waiver wire transactions to hold on to a guy for so long with a top 100 pick. Number 8, Adam Thielen, Minnesota Vikings. Fantasy football doesn't have to be complicated, and neither does fading Thielen, who failed to finish as a top 20 wide receiver in over half of his games for the second straight year. The 32-year-old wideout has made his hay in fantasy because of his ability to find the end zone 24 times since the start of 2020, but it's just not sustainable in the long term. Based on Thielen's targets and yardage totals, his total touchdown number should be closer to 16. Jefferson is an ascending rocket ship who will only see his touchdowns rise entering year 3, most likely coming at the detriment of Thielen. Dalvin Cook is long overdue for positive touchdown regression. Not to mention, Thielen's age may finally catch up to him after he posted his lowest PFF receiving grade and yards per route run since he first became a starter in 2016. With a slew of ankle injuries from last season also foreshadowing more issues for Thielen, the Vikings wide receiver has a plethora of red flags that suggest staying away entirely. Number 7, Damien Harris, New England Patriots. There is a major risk that Damien Harris will be used in a dreaded committee with second-year back Ramondre Stevenson and running back wide receiver hybrid Ty Montgomery, with the former a candidate to see work on all 3 downs. Stevenson and Harris split touches nearly 50-50 in the team's remaining 7 games last year, and in 6 games they played together, Stevenson edged out Harris in expected fantasy points per game with more favorable usage. Harris's production was heavily inflated by his 15 scores last year, which were nearly 6 more than his expected output. As a result, the RB's total expected fantasy points were equivalent to the RB 23 on a points per game basis, the RB 26.5 point scoring. With a limited role as a receiver, Harris has a limited fantasy ceiling that is accompanied by a super shaky floor if he loses volume to other Patriots running backs or fails to score as many touchdowns as he did last year. Just draft Stevenson instead because he is the upside play with the clearest path to receiving role, whereas Harris, you're just hoping he holds on to last year's production. Number 6, Amari Cooper, Cleveland Browns. Cooper is tough to get excited about. The wide receiver 27 in points per game last year finished as a top 10 fantasy wide receiver 3 times, but outside the wide receiver 3 territory in 9 other contests. He posted a 36% bust rate, 3rd worst to only Tyler Lockett and Darnell Mooney among top 28 wide receivers last year, despite playing in a super high-paced Dallas Cowboys offense. There was hope that Cooper could provide a higher floor as the clear number 1 wide receiver in Cleveland, but that target floor won't be accompanied by any high ceiling without Deshaun Watson for the first 11 games. Having Brissett a clear downgrade over Dak Prescott, alongside a projectable run-heavy offense, will make Cooper's production a roller coaster ride. There's also a glaring issue with the indoor-outdoor splits that Cooper has posted during his career. He averages 25 receiving yards fewer per game. Over the final 5 games of the season, the Browns play 1 game indoors. Before we get into my top 5 biggest bust players, here's a word from our sponsor, Drafters. If you love drafting NFL best ball teams, you have to check out Drafters.com. No ads, drops, trades, or setting lineups. Drafters.com is hosting a $1 million prize pool contest called the Drafters Million, which is a $20 entry with $250K to first place. Use the promo code FantasyPros for making your first deposit, and you'll get a free $20 ticket into the Drafters Million. Drafts start as soon as they fill and are running all the time, so all you have to do is make it on an account and hop in. Again, use the promo code FantasyPros when you make your first deposit on Drafters.com, and you'll get a free $20 ticket into the contest for a free shot at the $1 million prize pool. Now let's get back to the list. Number 5, David Montgomery, Chicago Bears running back. Despite being an entrenched workhorse with a top 10 opportunity share in 2021, Montgomery finished as a top 24 running back in fewer than half of his games last season. Former 6th-rounder Khalil Herbert was a top 12 running back in 2 of his 5 games when he had at least a 50% snap share. Projected volume is the only reason Montgomery's being drafted where his ADP is, but a new coaching staff might be open to approaching the backfield differently. In my heart of hearts, I think Herbert is the better, more explosive back. Drafters will be in for a rude awakening watching David Montgomery run behind an extremely shaky Bears offensive line on a reduced workload. Number 4, Ezekiel Elliott, Dallas Cowboys. Elliott's main fantasy appeal is the touchdown opportunity he will see in a high-powered Cowboys offense, coming off another season with poor rushing efficiency marks. Chances are he will probably beat his ADP because he doesn't miss games. But history hasn't been kind to 27-year-old running backs with 1,800 plus touches on their resumes, with running backs seeing a dip in production from the year prior by 1.3 PPR points per game. Zeke also doesn't project to have the same massive workload he's had in years past. He had 3 fewer per game than he did in 2020 last year. Tony Pollard quietly averaged 3 more touches per game and flashed elite rushing ability as PFF's second highest graded rusher. Elliott barely outscored Pollard during the second half of the year, despite scoring 6 touchdowns versus Pollard's 1. Pollard was also the better receiver, ranking 3rd in yards per route run versus Zeke's 57th ranking. The greatest Zeke stands will admit that the ride for him to finish as a fringe RB1 will hardly feel like a winning selection when he's hanging middling RB2 production most weeks. He's finished as a top 12 fantasy running back in just 35% of his games the past 2 years, and last year the Cowboys running back tied Najee Harris with the highest bust rate among top 8 finishers. He won't be a true difference maker at this stage in his career, so give me the breakout wide receivers in his range where Zeke is being drafted. Because if Zeke's points per game decrease at the same rate like backs with his wear and tear have had before him, he's looking at mid-range fantasy wide receiver 3 production. Number 3, Deebo Samuel, San Francisco 49ers. There's no reason to believe that Deebo Samuel will be able to sustain the same elite production from last season. Instead, natural regression is firmly in play, considering that no wide receiver earned more fantasy points above expectation than Samuel did in 2021. And that number doesn't come as a surprise, considering that nearly 30% of Samuel's fantasy points came from rushing alone. 365 rushing yards, 8 rushing touchdowns, and that Samuel scored 3 touchdowns of 75 plus yards. His usage in the 49ers offense seems destined to change with a more mobile quarterback under center, becoming the starter, creating a situation where Samuel's rushing attempts and short to intermediate targets become more obsolete. There's also increased target competition from a fully healthy George Kittle and a surging Brandon Ayuk. It's forgotten that Samuel's fantasy numbers and target share would have dipped during the second half of last year had it not been for the rushing, with Ayuk and Kittle both fully installed in the offense. He's too expensive as wide receiver 7, which assumes his unsustainable efficiency will carry over year to year. Number 2, Antonio Gibson, Washington Commanders. Gibson averaged 14.9 fantasy points per game and half-point scoring in 5 games with McKissick missed last year. But in the other 11 games, Gibson owned just an 8% target share to go along with 12.1 points per game as the RB23. He finished as the fantasy RB2 in just 53% of his games, 3 of which came in games that McKissick missed last year. He was already facing an uphill battle for upside that he's virtually hands-off in the first 7 rounds of drafts. Even more so with 3rd-round rookie running back Brian Robinson added into the mix, who's already been starting in Gibson's place for Washington this preseason. Meanwhile, Gibson continues to fumble and return kicks on special teams. Overall, the volume distribution in Washington backfield is not favoring Gibson's fantasy upside, and paying a top 65 overall price for him is something you just cannot do for a running back being selected in the dreaded RB dead zone despite his back-to-back top 12 finishes the past 2 seasons. It's a different year, so you need to adjust expectations. Number 1, DK Metcalf, Seattle Seahawks. The difference between having Geno Smith and Drew Lock at quarterback versus Russell Wilson cannot be overstated enough. It's a horrible situation to be in and puts DK Metcalf in a tough spot. And although the alpha wideout did rise to the occasion under a small sample size last year, I am suspect that removing their quarterback that led the NFL in yards per attempt and passer rating from a clean pocket before his finger injury is going to create a much larger impact over the 17-game sample size. Metcalf thrives off touchdown production with 32 touchdowns over his first 3 seasons, but scoring might be a rare commodity for this 2022 Seahawks offense. One of Seattle's top pass catchers might be able to get by based on just volume alone, but that's a bet I'm not willing to make drafting in the middle rounds. There's also no guarantee that Metcalf holds a stranglehold as the team's target share leader after he and Tyler Lockett have posted nearly identical target share and fantasy point per game numbers over the past 2 seasons. The addition of capable number 3 pass catcher Noah Fant should also not be ignored. Recall that when Gerald Everett was his most productive in 2021, it took a toll on Metcalf's numbers. The former Seahawks tight end outscored Metcalf from weeks 10 through 16. That completes my top 10 biggest busts for the upcoming fantasy football season. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe, and share with all your non-league mate friends. And before you go, if you want a chance to win a signed Javonte Williams Denver Broncos jersey, courtesy of our friends at Pristine Auction, you need to subscribe to the FantasyPros YouTube channel right now, comment below on this video, and that's it. We'll be announcing a winner right here on the channel. So make sure to turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when new episodes are up and to claim your prize.
Thanks for tuning in to the FantasyPros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at FantasyPros so you can get the latest news and updates to give you the edge you need in your fantasy league.